Tonight, you will lock your front door. You will check the windows. You will pull the blanket up to your chin and feel, for a moment, completely safe. But the real answer for why you do this is far stranger than you think. It has nothing to do with burglars. It goes back 300,000 years to a decision your ancestors made in the dark. For most of human history, there was no door to lock. There was only rock, a cave mouth facing the right direction, a ledge high enough to see danger coming. Your ancestors did not choose caves because they were cozy. They chose them because caves were the only structures on Earth that came pre-built, free, and strong enough to keep them alive. Think about what a cave actually offered. One entrance to defend instead of open ground on every side. A roof that never leaked. Walls that held heat from a fire long after the flames died down. For a slow, clawless, fangless animal, this was not comfort. This was survival technology, and it cost nothing to build. But here is the strange part. Humans did not live in caves for most of human history because they loved caves. They lived in caves because they had not yet solved a much harder problem. And once they solved it, something remarkable happened. They left. So why did they leave the safest shelter on the planet? The anthropologist Curtis Marine has spent decades studying caves along the South African coast, places like Pinnacle Point, where some of the earliest evidence of modern human behavior has been found. Marine's research shows something surprising. The caves that sheltered early humans weren't just hiding spots, they were laboratories. Inside them, humans were experimenting, grinding pigments, shaping tools, learning to exploit shellfish along the shoreline during harsh, dry climate swings that made the interior of the continent nearly unlivable. The cave, in other words, was never the destination. It was the incubator, because inside that shelter, something was changing that had nothing to do with rock or roofs. It was changing inside the skull. The primatologist Richard Wrangham has argued that the true turning point in human history wasn't shelter at all. It was fire, specifically cooking. Wrangham's research suggests that once early humans began consistently cooking their food, something extraordinary happened to their bodies. Cooked food is easier to digest. It releases more calories for less chewing, less gut work, less energy spent breaking it down. That saved energy had to go somewhere. It went to the brain. Over generations, brains that once weighed under 500 grams grew toward triple that size. And a bigger brain doesn't just think more, it plans more, it imagines more. It starts asking questions that have nothing to do with tonight's safety and everything to do with tomorrow's possibilities. A cave cannot answer those questions. A cave has one shape, one entrance, one view of the sky. But a growing human mind wants more than protection. It wants control. The archaeologist John Gallett, who has spent years tracing the earliest use of fire at sites across Africa and Europe, points to something quietly revolutionary. Fire didn't just cook food. It created light after sunset. It created warmth without walls. And once humans could carry fire with them, they were no longer chained to whatever shelter the landscape happened to provide. Suddenly, a cliff wasn't required. A cave mouth wasn't required. A group of humans with fire, tools, and cooperative planning could build their own shelter wherever they wanted to be. This is the moment everything shifts, because once you can build your own protection, you are no longer choosing a location based on what nature gives you. You are choosing it based on what you need. Need to follow migrating herds? Build a shelter near the herd. Need better access to water? Build near the river. Need to trade with a neighboring group 3 valleys over? Build somewhere in between. The cave offered safety, but shelters you build yourself offer something caves never could: freedom of movement. And freedom of movement changes everything about how a species survives. Groups that could relocate easily could follow food instead of starving beside an empty cave. Groups that could build near multiple neighboring communities could trade, share knowledge, exchange mates, and avoid the genetic bottlenecks that isolated cave-bound groups sometimes faced. The world stopped being a set of fixed shelters scattered across a landscape and started being an open network of possibility. Here is the twist most people never expect. Leaving the cave wasn't a leap into danger. It was the opposite. It was the moment humans became advanced enough to make their own safety instead of borrowing it from the earth. That single shift, from finding shelter to making shelter, marks one of the most important turning points in the story of your species. It is arguably more important than the discovery of fire itself, because it is the moment humans stopped adapting to their environment and started reshaping it to fit them. Huts came next, then walls made of mud and branches, then permanent settlements, then villages, then cities. Every wall you have ever lived behind, every roof over every home you've ever slept in, traces its lineage back to that first shelter someone built with their own hands instead of simply occupying what nature left behind. But something else happened during that long transition, something quieter, something that still lives inside you today. The instinct for the cave never left. Notice how a small, enclosed space still feels safer than a wide-open room. Notice how a corner booth in a restaurant feels more comfortable than a table in the middle of the floor. Notice how, during a thunderstorm, you don't gather in the biggest, most open part of the house. You retreat toward smaller rooms, toward walls on more than one side. That is not a coincidence. That is 300,000 years of shelter-seeking behavior, quietly running in the background of a brain built inside caves and refined beside campfires. Your ancestors didn't abandon the cave because it stopped working. They abandoned it because they became capable of building something better, something that could move with them, adapt with them, grow with them. And every time you lock a door tonight, every time you choose the seat with your back to the wall, every time a small, enclosed room feels safer than an open field, you are not being paranoid. You are simply doing what your ancestors did the very first night they built a shelter with their own hands and realized, for the first time in the history of their species, that safety no longer had to be found. It could be made. So tonight, when you lock that door and feel the walls settle around you, remember, that feeling isn't really about tonight at all.